Hello, and welcome back into the Reading Corner. Today we are going to be looking at this book, The Myth of the Rational Voter by Bryan Caplan, and with the subtitle, Why Democracies Choose Bad Policies. And I am going to be looking at what his argument is, and then breaking down where I agree and where I disagree. Kaplan is a trained economist, and his work takes on a pretty academic tone, especially since it's published by Princeton Press. His primary assertion is that there are fundamental economic policies where the public just has wrong beliefs, and these wrong beliefs and biases create failed democratic policies. Kaplan's argument rests on a survey where members of the public and a large pool of economists were surveyed, and the members of the public's opinion differed on almost every question than the economists, their average opinions. And this tended to skew in certain direction towards biases. And Kaplan calls these four biases anti-market bias, make-work bias, pessimistic bias, and anti-foreign bias. Now, Kaplan gives two reasons why he believes the public is wrong and not the economic consensus. Now, first, the informed public opinion, which they also measured, tends to agree more with the economist's opinion and economic takes than the regular public. And second, he believes that the benefit of the doubt should go to the economists and not the public, and that the burden of proof should be on the person who is challenging the expert. The way Kaplan sees it, voters are more irrational than they are uninformed. And what he means by this is that voters are tending to try and vote not for their own self benefit, but to benefit the public. But even in this, they are irrational because their vote is not always for what will actually benefit the public. And a lot of times, this is because of sort of a tragedy of the commons, meaning that the voter is not the deciding vote in an election. So there is a cost to holding a wrong belief that it may benefit you psychologically in some way, but so long as you're not the deciding vote in the election, you decide to sway one way or the other. So this voter may be irrational in the way he votes because he wants to hold on to a certain thought pattern. So the public's irrationality and the economic misconceptions that they hold, according to Kaplan, create bad economic policy. And this is important to distinguish because he largely dismisses other possible explanations, such as maybe the politicians not representing the people's interests, or politics being swayed too much by money, or something along those lines that may be an alternative explanation as to why democracy might not work always in the best economic interest of the people. Since, according to Kaplan, all these bad economic policies actually relate back to voter preferences, he actually questions, why do democracies do as well as they do, given the voter preferences? For instance, Kaplan says that the US economy is much more market oriented and open to international competition than you would suspect from the biases of the large majority of its residents. The two reasons he gives for this are selective participation and actually politicians not doing the voters' will and going against their will because they want to be reelected, and sometimes to get reelected they have to have better results. And on the other hand, for selective participation, Kaplan explains that since the knowledgeable public is more skewed towards the view of the economists, and since the knowledgeable public is statistically more likely to vote because education levels skew how likely someone is to vote, that means that the electoral process is actually skewed a little bit more towards the view of the economist because of this selective participation. Kaplan's conclusion largely restates many of his points and really points to the fact that voting and purchasing are different, and that the opinion of the public can bring irrational outcomes that do not benefit the public as a whole. And then he also calls for further research and uh, more books and such to be written from the perspective of economists who are looking into what are the political implications of their beliefs and how are these applied in a real world basis. For my final rating, I give Caplan's book 4 stars out of 5 and 78 on a scale of 0 to 100. And the first thing I agree with from Caplan's perspective is that yes, voting and purchasing are not the same, largely because voting is a common pool, and it's unlikely that your vote is going to just come up the deciding factor in a vote of hundreds of thousands of votes. So, yes, it is a common pool, and this could create some fallacies in the process. And the main fallacy that I could probably see is passivity, where someone chooses not to vote because of the perceived impact that it will have, or they choose not to hold politicians accountable because of their feeling that they might not be able to change anything. And it's not worth spending as much time on because it's not Caplan's main purpose in writing this book. But I do actually tend to agree with the economic beliefs that he espouses and with the biases that he sets forward for the public, and specifically in disagreeing with those biases. However, I disagree with his assessment as to why democracies fail and the difference between the public and economists. Well, I do almost 100% happen to agree with the expert consensus in this scenario. It is wrong that the burden of the proof lies on those questioning the experts. Actually, I believe that if the expert is presenting a case, it's their job to defend their case that they're presenting. And then at that point, if someone has questions as to the arguments that they've presented, or if they disagree with the argument that's been presented, then the burden of proof is on the public to explain why they disagree and explain where these supposed experts are wrong. However, it's just not 100% true to say that the burden of proof lies on the public rather than the experts. I also question the existence of an expert consensus. Just because the average of beliefs of the economists sway one way does not mean that there is a consensus at all. Even if, let's say, 98 out of 100 economists agree on something, the fact that there are any dissenters means that there's not a consensus. And there is evidence that can be looked at in a different way. And there's a lot more questions as to how Caplan defines expert economist, and whether or not you can actually trust that the expert economists are right on all of these things. But aside from those questions, I don't think there is a consensus because there are different ways to look at the evidence, and the existence of dissenters, as small as a minority as they may be, means that there isn't a consensus. Finally, if Caplan is correct about voter biases and the overall public biases about economics that are fundamentally wrong, then I think that the focus should actually be more so on taking a look at why these biases exist and what can be said to educate people on why these biases are incorrect, rather than just discussing why the public is so wrong. And I think that Sowell and Hazlitt and Hayek and Mises and so many others have done a really great job at just explaining in pretty simple terms these economic principles and educating people on them, rather than having this almost elitist look that Caplan seems to have, that, us economists who are educated have it right and the public has it wrong. I think that the discussion is not particularly productive. Thank you for joining me again in the Reading Corner. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you next time in the Reading Corner.